Hello, welcome back. Right, let's get stuck in here and add in our secondary elements. So similar to the portal, we went ahead and we added rigid body debris and some dust volumetrics and some particles. And I feel like it's really important to accompany any of the magical effects with secondary environmental elements to make it feel like the magic's physically there in the scene. And even if you're working on just a magical effect for your show reel, maybe consider adding in some environmental elements like around that effect. It's going to make it 100 times better. So let's see what we want here. Let's start with some sparks. So if we come to our shield, now anything we do add here as a secondary element, we should base off of the moving shield. We don't want sparks and smoke to be animated with this movement, so I'm not going to use the locked off one here. I'll use the actual moving shield. And what I need is our impact points, our ground impact points, and our impact points from the shield. So let me double check these. So here we have the points, if you can see, hitting the environment, and then we have the points hitting the shield. So we can just use those directly, and I've put in a group here for ground hits. So that might be useful, might not, but at least we know later on that we can delete out, like say, the shield from the ground if we need to change any of the effects that we add onto that. So let's take this first of all, and I guess pop replicate. What I need to do is, or point replicate, I need to make a source for sparks. And I think if we do a point replicate here, we can turn this into a bunch of points and probably use the same source for the smoke. So for now, I want to bulk up these points by adding, in this case, there's 100 times more. And we definitely want to keep our input points and copy our source attributes. So we get the normals and everything we want there. There's no velocity at this point. So let's start with something like that. And then there's a handy little feature here on the point replicate, this radial velocity. So let's try and set that quickly. I'll put down a point SOP. And this normal is pointing back towards the camera, and I want the velocity of the particles to be going away from the camera. So we just need to invert our normal here. So let's set a velocity, and we'll use at n times -1. Visualize our velocity. So that's the direction we want both the smoke and the sparks to move in. And then if I change this radial velocity here, the point replicate's pretty much doing the job for me of making that a spread. So we just need that to spread slightly, and then I'm going to put down an attribute noise and just multiply some of those velocities so we get very random velocities coming out of those sparks. So it'd be a 1D noise, and we multiply. So something like that, we get a nice variation there in speed. And then we have that happening on the ground as well. So that's a pretty decent source. I'm gonna immediately drop down a pop net here. And let's just see what this gives us. And obviously I need to also include, in this case we only need a ground plane, so I might just try and steal that from somewhere else. I'm pretty sure I have a DOP with a ground plane in somewhere. There's our ground plane there. Let's just see if that works. I'm not seeing it. Oh, okay, yeah, because this is importing it from the DOP that it's from, which is the portal dust. Should still be fine. But in that case, we actually need to run that sim, so I'm just going to make my own. Let's just make sure our DOP is set to the correct DOP here. That's fine, and then I'll just, oops. A bit messy, but we don't need it for much. I just need something in here. There we go. And if I have a look here, we're starting at frame 100. For some reason I still don't see the ground plane. I'm not sure why. Let me start by just sourcing some points here in the sim, and I'll see if I can figure out the ground plane thing later. So we want points, and I'm going to set a constant birth rate, that's fine. And we have inheriting velocity, so it should pretty much be it. So it's doing something. And we have a long life. And if I disable that ground plane, something super weird going on here. Looking at all this and all, I'm not seeing anything broken. And yet there's, I mean, these particles are only existing for a few frames. So I must be doing something wrong. Ah, okay, so that's just the source. And why is that? Maybe our velocity is too high. So the points are actually just disappearing. Doesn't seem to be. Let's try and increase our velocity. Okay, I think I know what's going on. So there's an automatic point offset when you have a source with velocities on it. So in the birth section here, I have a jitter birth time set to positive, so I can switch that to none, and the first frame should have just the source. And then it moves. So it depends if you're trying to remove some substepping from the source, or you just want the first frame to have moving points, but I guess that's what we were looking at before. Something I don't understand though is why the particles aren't existing for very long. And I have a feeling that's got something to do with this invisible ground plane. It definitely exists. Oh, and now it appears. Maybe a bug? I don't know. Let's just keep moving here. So I'm still not getting much of a life. Let's try some more. Oh, I think I've got it. There's probably, yeah, I've got an age attribute on the source. So if I look at my points from that I'm using as a source, I already have an age and a life attribute on there, so I need to clear this up. So and this is always a case when you move from one sim and you try and use that sim in another sim, just make sure you clear every attribute and just keep what you really need. In this case, I only really need velocity. Oh, there you go. So that's awesome. Okay. So now maybe we can get something done. So let's go. I'll keep a high velocity and I'll set this to something more useful, and I'm going to put down a gravity as well. I'm getting some weird sections here where it looks like the particles are shooting in the wrong direction. So all the ones that are hitting the ground are moving right, and then I get a random one which goes the other way. So let's see if I can narrow down what's causing that. These all look fine to me. Through the pop replicate, through the attribute noise. Aha. So here I need the remap to be only to 0 because I'm multiplying the velocity by a noise and my minimum value is a negative value. So I just need that to go from 0 and in this case 2. And let's take another look. There we go. So something I want is for the points not to shoot out and create this shape which carries on moving. So some sparks should be so slow that they at least connect the furthest point to the actual source. So it might be a case of adjusting how this velocity is working. So let's take a look at just one of these and make sure we've got some very slow velocities. So a higher frequency noise there. Let's just try higher frequency for now. That's better. So if you look at this small one here, the difference in velocities are so drastic that some of them are so slow they get left behind. Okay, it's still pretty extreme. I'm going to reduce the age a bit, say 0.5, reduce the velocity a little bit, and then let's add in a collision object, and we'll just point to our sphere or our shield here. And now we just need to find it. Fix shield. There we go. And we use deforming because that's the moving one. And let's just merge this in. I don't see it. There we go. Because it's only appearing here. There we go. So now the particles are bouncing off that shield. So pretty crazy. All we need to do is adjust some of these physical values here. And you can spend ages tweaking the values of this sim, but at the end of the day, we just want something bright and flashy for a few frames. So we can control a lot of that after we have the actual particle simulation. So for example, if I move straight from this point down to actually generating what the sparks look like, then we can come back and tweak the sim based on how it looks rather than just looking at points. So for starters, if I take just the particles here and we set a time blend and a trail. I don't think I need the time blend unless I write it out, but it depends how many substeps I've got as well. So I'll just put down a time blend, which should try and interpolate in between frames. And then a trail. And there's a million ways you can make sparks. You could be copying lines. You could just be rendering points with motion blur. Or you can use a trail, which if the points arcing quite a lot should give you a good arc. So something to define the length of the spark, and then we just add a polygon between them based on ID. So that's some pretty fireworks going on. And I can right now also, I'm going to make an attribute based on the length of each one of those lines. So we'll probably use this in a few places. $pt divided by $npt, put down a color, and let's just give a little fall off for each one of these sparks. So we'll ramp from the mask attribute. So we have a bright leading edge and then it tails off. So I mean, it's quite a lot and it looks pretty extreme, but like I said, we can finish the rest of the setup and then adjust how many points or how wide the point replicate here is, for example. So I can make that smaller now. So a bunch of stuff we can do after this, after we've seen the final look. And here's another thing I like to do with sparks, is actually just put down something that's the end of the spark. So if you look at a reference of sparks, you'll see, let's see if I can bring something up. So there's going to be a lot of cartoonish ones. Here's some, but it doesn't really have what I'm looking for. That's more embers. There's those curves I was talking about. A little bit like this, but this is obviously specifically a sparkler. But you'll often see, especially in slow-mo videos and sparks interacting with something, you get a little tip where the front of the spark is trying to break off or explode into smaller pieces. And that gives you a little high detail area. And it's not like you want it to look like that, but if you just add something to the end of that line, once you render it with motion blur, it actually does make quite a big difference. So to do that, I'll orient a line here on Z. I'll do a mask on that as well. And then if we add a point at the origin, I'll do a pop replicate. Point replicate. And we don't need so many. And let's see, I can't see anything. Add a point replicate. So we just want a random collection of points there, and I'll copy these lines. And then I can use whichever method I want to kind of mess up this orientation. I don't have a velocity here. So I can put in a random here. Just as an example for now. So you see there's just a random velocity there, and I can randomly scale these as well. And for each one of these points, I can randomize the orientation of this whole setup here as well. So let's say I have our particles, then I just use a copy. Copy these on. Try to figure out what I'm looking at here. So I do have these the wrong way around. So I'll just adjust that here. And then also put in a random scale based on ID. Just small. And I'm also going to throw in a random scale. So something just as simple as that can make a big difference once you see it rendered. So once it's got motion blur, you've added just an extra little bit of detail, and when it's blurred, it adds an extra dimension to those sparks. So it can be pretty effective. So I'll just do something like that. And also, so you see I've randomized some orientation on the first copy, and then I'm randomizing some scale and rotation now again. Let's choose what's a good one. Yeah, on Z. And we should get a lot of variation that way. And that's it. And then obviously we want to multiply those colors down by the actual age. So we've got to make sure we transfer our point attributes here. And then we can make a lot of changes. So we can say color is multiplied. Again, we can use a ramp. Which is age divided by life. So they'll go nice and dark before they actually die. And that seems to be working for the extra element I copied, but not the main one. I need to merge this. So that is just our detail element, and here is our main spark. There we go. And same thing, we can base our alpha. And what else? P-scale. Oops. And then another thing we can do, I'm going to use a separate wrangle here, is just randomize the color. So we'll be using the color in the shader. So we'll just use another fit01, randomize by ID. Between 0.25 and 2. So each one of them can look slightly different. So some are brighter than others. And all of these small tweaks make a huge difference when it's rendered with motion blur. So you can actually start out with something that feels like way too many points. And once you see it, because you have so much variation in scale and in intensity, it kind of works. So I think we can definitely, there's room to play with the size of the source and the randomness of this velocity that shoots the points out. There's a ton of stuff we can change there. What it does when it interacts with the shield. Like, I think it's all living for too long. And it can probably have a random variance as well. So at the moment, for me, this is looking a bit like fireworks, and it looks like a bit too many, and the velocities are a bit too crazy. But I think you get the general idea. And all of these values can be toned down now that we have an actual testable network here, where we can look at the end result and then come back and tweak some of these values. So I'll do one more tweak here. And if I'm not happy with it, I'll keep tweaking it on my own. But I won't be changing anything pretty much except for these velocity settings and this noise here. Well, that's quite a big difference. So in this case, you can see the detail layer, because it's not being scaled by the velocity of the points from the original sim, that ends up being all you see. So we could also multiply this by this velocity. Multiplied by the length of Vx, Vy, and Vz. So here, at least if the point's moving slow, then the detail layer is moving much smaller as well. So I'm just trying to figure out what these are. I think that's points bouncing off. That's looking a bit better, I think. It's really just a matter of looking at this and keep playing it, keep messing with settings until you feel like you're convinced it's working. And obviously nothing set in stone. We can keep moving forward, shade it, render it, and then if we don't like the sparks later on, we can always come back and tweak. So I'll end this one here. I think it's been quite a long one, and then we'll come back in the next video and add some smoke. So I'll see you then.